It was the autumn of 1936, the kind of autumn where the wind seems to carry secrets. I'd been hunting these forests since I was 12, and in all my years, I thought I knew every tree, every path, every sound the woods could make. But that morning felt wrong. The frost was heavier than it should have been. My breath came out in clouds that hung in the air longer than they should, almost reluctant to fade. The forest was too quiet, no bird calls, no rustle of squirrels. Just the sound of my own boots crushing frozen leaves. I was a few miles in when I saw it, an old oak, taller than anything else around it, its roots swollen and twisted like the fingers of some ancient hand. At the base, something glinted. It wasn't the metallic glint of a hunter's shell casing. It was deeper, duller, like metal that had been sleeping for decades. I knelt, brushing away frost and dirt, and my fingers closed around a leather satchel, stiff and cold to the touch. The straps cracked when I opened it, and inside was a camera. Not the boxy, bulky kind you'd see in a studio, but a sleek, foreign thing. A Leica, I'd only ever seen one in magazines. Black body, silver lens ring, the metal pitted with age. But here's the thing, it was warm. I swear to God, it was warm, like someone had been holding it moments ago. The forest around me seemed to lean in as I lifted it. I looked through the viewfinder. Everything seemed normal, the clearing, the oak, my own gloved hands. Then I heard it. Click. The shutter fired on its own. I froze. My finger hadn't been anywhere near the release. I pulled the camera away from my face and stared at it. Nothing moved. No smoke from a hidden cigarette, no footsteps in the frost, just the whisper of wind through dead leaves. Curiosity got the better of me. I wound the film, carefully, slowly, and another frame advanced. I don't know why I didn't drop it right there. Maybe because the thing felt expensive. Important. Like it had a story to tell. I turned it over in my hands and saw something scratched into the baseplate. Not engraved, scratched, like someone in a hurry, or desperate. It wasn't English. Looked like German, maybe. The letters were jagged, uneven. Seat Dike. I didn't know what it meant then. The wind picked up suddenly, carrying with it a faint sound, like a camera shutter, far away, echoing through the trees. My skin prickled. I decided to head back to town. As I slung the satchel over my shoulder, I glanced back at the oak. For a split second, I thought I saw a shadow standing between its roots, tall, thin, perfectly still. But when I blinked, it was gone. By the time I reached my cabin, I'd convinced myself I was imagining things. I set the camera on my table and lit the stove. The fire popped, and I told myself I'd take the camera to Harold, the local photographer, in the morning. But that night, as I lay in bed, I woke to the sound of the shutter firing again, click. Click, click, slow, deliberate, coming from the other room. I got up, heart pounding, and stepped into the dim light of the kitchen. The camera sat where I'd left it. But the lens was pointing directly at me. I swear, I hadn't touched the damn thing since I got home. But there it was, the cold metal eye staring straight into me like it had been waiting. The stove's firelight caught the glass just enough to show a faint reflection my own face, pale and tense, with the orange glow dancing across it. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd bumped the table earlier, maybe the strap had shifted and turned it. But as I stepped closer, I realized something was wrong. The camera was sitting in the exact center of the table. I never put things dead center like that, not without thinking about it. And then, as I stood there, it clicked. Not the sound, the realization. The shutter hadn't gone off once while I was looking at it. The sound I'd heard had been coming from inside the satchel. I slowly reached for it, my fingers trembling more from the air in the cabin than from the cold outside. The leather was stiff, but when I pried it open, I found a small, waxy envelope tucked inside a side pocket I hadn't noticed before. Inside were developed photographs. 6 of them. The first showed a deer in mid-leap, its form blurred, caught in a strange double exposure. The second, a campfire, the flames twisting into almost human shapes. The third and fourth, the oak tree from earlier, taken from different angles. Then I got to the fifth. It was me. Not me tonight, not me this morning, me in that exact clearing, standing with the satchel in my hand, looking straight into the lens. I could see the frost on my coat, the breath hanging from my mouth. But there was something else in the photo, something I didn't see when I was there. A shadow behind me. Not mine. It was tall, stretched impossibly thin, its head bent at an angle no human neck could make. And its hand, if you could call it a hand, was reaching toward my shoulder. I felt my skin crawl and flipped to the last photo. It was me again. Same clearing. Same moment. But this time, I was turned slightly, my face twisted into something halfway between confusion and fear. And just behind me, the shadow's hand was touching my coat. The photo looked wrong. The light didn't match the others. The frost on the ground seemed to be melting around the thing's feet. And in the very bottom corner of the picture was a second shadow. Smaller. Shaped exactly like mine. But it wasn't connected to me. I dropped the photos onto the table and backed away. The fire popped loud enough to make me flinch. The cabin felt too small, the air too thin. I glanced toward the door, wondering if I should run to town right then and there. And that's when I heard it. A whisper. Low, muffled, but close, far too close. Coming from the direction of the table. I turned back. The camera's shutter fired again. And this time, the flash went off. For a second, the cabin was drowned in white, blinding, searing, like lightning had struck inside the walls. When my vision cleared, I was gasping, heart hammering against my ribs. The stove still glowed in the corner, the shadows still flickered across the wooden walls, but something had changed. The camera was no longer sitting where I'd left it. It was closer. Only by a few inches, but I knew. I knew. And there on the table, half slid from the slot as if the machine had been working silently while I stood frozen, was a photograph. I didn't want to touch it. Every nerve in me screamed to leave it there. But my hands betrayed me, lifting the glossy square into the firelight. It was my cabin tonight, the table, the stove, even the crooked chair in the corner. But the photograph showed something else too. Faces. They were crammed into the corners of the image, too many to count. Dozens, maybe more. Their mouths hung open as if they were screaming, though no sound came from their lips. Their eyes were huge, warped, like melted glass. And the worst part, every single one of them was looking at me. I dropped the photo, but that didn't help. Even face down on the table, I could still feel their eyes boring into me. My chest was heaving. I wanted to throw the whole camera into the fire, to watch it melt into slag and be done with it. But some terrible curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. Because even as I stared at the photo, a new sound rose from inside the cabin. A whisper. Dozens of whispers. Coming from nowhere, and everywhere. Low, muffled, like voices pressing through the walls. I staggered back toward the door, fumbling for my coat. But then the shutter fired again. Click. Another photo slid out. This one was darker, the image barely visible in the firelight. My cabin again, but not empty. Figures were standing around the table, their bodies blurred, their faces stretched, like they weren't made for film or light. I counted 4 of them. All facing me. And in the very back of the photo, behind the stove, a shadow taller than the ceiling, its head bent unnaturally low to fit into the frame. I couldn't stay there. I grabbed the satchel, stuffed the photos inside without looking again, and ran out into the freezing night air. The forest loomed beyond, black and silent. Behind me, inside the cabin, the shutter clicked once more. But I was already running. Branches clawed at my coat, roots snatched at my boots, but I didn't dare slow down. The forest was deathly silent, no owls, no crickets, nothing but the sound of my lungs tearing and my boots crunching over frost. It felt like the woods themselves were holding their breath, listening. Behind me, I could still hear it. Click. The shutter. Not once. Not twice. But over and over. A slow, steady rhythm chasing me through the trees. Click, click, click. Every time it went off, I swore the shadows grew longer, stretching past the edges of my lantern light, reaching for me. I didn't stop until I saw the faint orange glow of town lamps through the trees. My legs nearly gave out as I stumbled down the frozen dirt road and into the square. It was after midnight. The place was deserted, save for a single light burning in Harold's photography shop. I staggered to the door and pounded on it with both fists. After what felt like hours, Harold appeared, dressing gown loose, spectacles hanging crooked on his nose. He started to scold me, but the words died when he saw my face. Without a word, I shoved the satchel into his hands. My voice cracked. "Develop it. Please." Harold frowned but ushered me inside. The chemicals and machines of his darkroom were already warm. He set to work, while I sat trembling in the corner, watching the red light flicker across his pale features. When he pulled the first image from the solution, I knew from the way his hands shook that it was bad. He laid it flat. My stomach dropped. It was me sprinting through the forest, lantern raised, mouth twisted in panic. The photograph had been taken moments ago. Another print came next. This time, I was frozen mid-step, head turned slightly back, and behind me, barely visible through the blur of trees, were figures. 3. No, 4. Too tall, too thin, their limbs bent wrong, like they'd been sketched by someone who had never seen a human before. Their faces were smudges of white, eyeless, mouthless, but somehow staring right at me. Harold staggered back, his chair clattering to the floor. His voice was barely a whisper. "This isn't the first time." He hurried into the back and returned with a brittle folder of yellowed newspapers. He tossed one down in front of me. The headline, dated 1912, read, "Fourth hunting party vanishes, strange photographs baffle authorities." And there it was, the same clearing, the same twisted figures standing behind a group of smiling hunters who had no idea what was behind them. One by one, Harold spread more clippings across the counter. 1905, 1910. 1922, every few years, hunters disappeared in those woods, their last photographs showing the same clearing, the same faceless shadows. And now, me. My hands shook as I whispered, "Why does it keep coming back? Why me?" Harold's face was ashen, his voice trembling. "Because once the camera finds you, it never lets go." The words hung in the dim red light of Harold's darkroom, heavier than the chemical stench. I wanted to shout at him, demand what he meant, but I couldn't. My throat had closed, my chest tight. He shuffled back to the counter, his trembling hands pulling the last negatives from the drying line. "Look for yourself," he whispered. "Maybe then you'll believe me." He slid the first negative beneath the magnifier. The image was faint, ghostly, but clear enough. It was me, again, running through the woods. My lantern glowed like a dying star, casting thin beams into the black. But there, behind me. At first, I thought it was just another tree. A tall, dark column stretching higher than the others. But when Harold adjusted the magnifier, the shape sharpened. It wasn't a tree. It had shoulders. And a head. Bent at an impossible angle, pressing low, as though it had to fold itself to fit in the frame. I stumbled back, my hand knocking over a tray of developer. The liquid splashed across the floor, but I couldn't take my eyes off the image. The next negative was worse. The same figure, closer this time, impossibly close. Its outline jagged, its arms too long, one of them reaching toward the blurred shape of my shoulder. And then came the third. I felt bile rise in my throat. Because the shadow wasn't behind me anymore. It was beside me. Not chasing. Not looming. Just standing there, like it had been walking with me the whole time, waiting. Harold slammed the magnifier shut. Enough. His voice cracked. Sweat ran down his forehead despite the cold. You have to burn it. Burn the film, the camera, all of it. My voice finally tore free, hoarse and shaking. If this has been happening since 1905, why hasn't anyone destroyed it before? Harold stared at me for a long time, his eyes glassy with something like grief. Then he whispered. They tried. The silence that followed was suffocating. I glanced toward the satchel, the Leica still sitting inside like a predator crouched in leather skin. And for the first time since finding it, I realized something bone deep. The camera wasn't just showing me what it captured. It was showing me what was coming. The thought froze me more than the winter air ever could. Those faces in the photos, the shadows, the impossible figure bending through the frames, none of it was the past. None of it was memory. It was a warning. Harold must have seen the realization in my eyes, because he spoke softly, almost like he pitied me. You're not the first. God help you, you won't be the last. I snapped my head toward him. What do you mean? Without a word, Harold reached under the counter and pulled out a battered wooden box. He set it between us and slid it across the table. The brass clasp clicked open with a sound that felt too loud in the silent room. Inside were old letters, cracked with age, written in German. On top of them, wrapped in brittle brown paper, was a leather-bound diary. This belonged to the first owner of that Leica, Harold said. A German war correspondent named Otto Drexler. Bought it in Berlin, 1928. He was traveling America, writing about the old timber towns. And then he vanished. Right here, in these woods. I opened the diary carefully. The ink was faded, the handwriting sharp and deliberate at first, but it grew frantic, jagged, almost carved into the pages as the entries went on. I scanned the first pages, details of train rides, names of towns, sketches of mountains and rivers. Ordinary things. But by the third entry, the tone shifted. The trees do not sound right at night. They whisper when the wind is still. Last evening, I heard footsteps behind me, though I walked alone. When I turned, there was nothing, only the sense of being watched. Another entry, days later, read. The man with no mouth follows. I see him in the glass of my lens. Never in the open, never when others are near. Only when I am alone. I turned the page, my throat dry. This time the words were smeared, as if written with a shaking hand. The camera belongs to it. Each click, a piece of me taken. Each photo, another step closer. God forgive me, I cannot stop. The final entry wasn't words at all. Just a photograph, glued into the page. It showed the same clearing where I'd found the satchel. The oak tree, looming in the background. And there, in the center of the frame, stood Otto himself. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. And just behind him, one hand resting on his shoulder, was the shadow. The diary slipped from my hands, hitting the counter with a dull thud. Harold whispered, "Do you understand now? That camera doesn't capture memories. It captures you. Piece by piece. Until there's nothing left to take." And as he said it, the shutter clicked again. But neither of us had touched the Leica. Harold and I stared at it, the satchel still half open on the counter, the camera resting inside like it had been sleeping. Yet the faint smell of burned flash powder hung in the air. Slowly, with trembling hands, Harold reached for the satchel. "Don't," I started, but it was too late. He pulled the Leica free and held it in the fire-red light of the darkroom. There was a fresh photo sliding out. Neither of us breathed as Harold plucked it between his fingers and held it up. His face drained of color. Oh God! It was his shop. Tonight. The counter, the magnifier, the trays of chemicals. And there we were, Harold and me, standing exactly as we stood now. But behind us, crowding every inch of the frame, were those faces. Not blurred this time. Not distorted. Clear. Dozens of them, pressed against the edges of the photo, as if straining to break through. And in the center, towering over both of us, was the shadow. Its head bent, its arms stretching wide, hands brushing the shelves on either wall. Then Harold whispered, "Do you hear it?" I tilted my head, heart pounding. At first, there was nothing. But then faint, almost beneath hearing, came a sound. Voices. Whispers. Hundreds of them. Layered over one another, speaking in no language I knew, yet somehow I understood the feeling, hunger. We dropped the photo, but the voices didn't stop. They grew louder, filling the shop, pressing against my skull like the words were being spoken inside my head. That night, I barely slept. And when I did, I dreamed. I was standing in the clearing again. Frost on the ground, the oak looming overhead. The camera hung heavy around my neck, the strap cutting into my shoulders. All around me, the blurred people from the photographs stood in silence. Not moving, not blinking. Just staring. I tried to speak, to scream, but no sound came. My jaw wouldn't move. My throat was locked. Then the shadow emerged. It stepped forward from the trees, impossibly tall, its limbs bending like broken branches. It raised my camera and aimed it at me. The shutter fired. Click. I jolted awake in my bed, drenched in sweat. But the sound followed me out of the dream. Because from the kitchen, I heard the Leica. Click. The sound froze me in place. My bed felt like a coffin, the air in my lungs heavy as stone. For a long moment, I couldn't even move. Then, slowly, I swung my legs to the floor. The cabin was dark, the stove fire had long since died. The silence was broken only by the creak of my floorboards as I crept forward. Another sound came, softer this time. The faint scratch of paper sliding against wood. Another photograph. I lit my lantern with shaking hands and pushed open the kitchen door. The Leica sat on the table. Alone. Innocent. But beside it lay 3 fresh photos, face down. My stomach twisted as I reached for the first one. It showed me lying in my bed. The exact moment I'd just woken up. The sheets twisted around me, my eyes wide, staring toward the kitchen door. I flipped the second. Me again, mid-step, moving through the hallway, lantern raised. Only the photograph had been taken from the kitchen itself. From where the Leica was sitting. And then came the third. It was the kitchen, tonight. The table, the stove, the crooked chair in the corner. My lantern glow filled the frame. But in the background, through the window behind me, the forest was closer. Not the endless expanse of trees I'd known all my life, no. These trees were bent, leaning in toward the glass, their branches clawing downward like hands pressing against the panes. I dropped the photo, heart thundering. My head swam as I realized something. The pictures weren't just showing me. They were changing the world around me. Each photo was a step forward. The cabin, the woods, reality itself bending. I stuffed the photos back into the satchel and ran to Harold's shop before dawn broke. When he saw me burst through the door, his face told me he already knew. I dreamt it too, he said quietly. The clearing. The whispers. He pulled out the folder of old hunting photos and spread them across the counter once more. At first, they looked the same. Hunters smiling. Blurred faces in the corners. The oak tree. But then Harold began to overlay them, carefully aligning the edges. My breath caught. Because when stacked, the trees in the background shifted. Frame by frame, they bent a little more inward. The ground cracked wider. The shadows spilled deeper. Like a puzzle slowly coming together. "The forest is moving," Harold whispered. "And it's been moving for decades." The words hit me harder than a rifle stock. I stared down at the layered photographs, the slow bending of trees, the earth splitting wider in each frame. It wasn't just a trick of the camera. The forest itself was shifting, creeping closer to, what? Before I could ask, the Leica clicked again. Both of us froze. The satchel sat on the counter, half open, the lens aimed toward the floor. Yet when Harold pulled the new photo free, his hands began to shake so badly I thought he'd drop it. He turned it around slowly. It wasn't the clearing. It wasn't the woods. It wasn't even the cabin. It was this shop. Right now. I was in the photo, bent over the counter, staring at the layered images. Harold was beside me, holding the Leica. The angle was impossible, taken from the ceiling, as though something had been watching us from directly above. And in the photo, just behind my shoulder, stood the shadow. Closer than ever. I snatched the picture from Harold's hand and shoved it aside. But another photo was already sliding out. This one had a faint date scrawled in the corner, as if burned into the emulsion itself. My breath caught. The date was wrong. 2025. I looked at Harold. He was whispering prayers under his breath, his lips pale, trembling. With shaking fingers, I turned the photograph toward the lantern light. And there I was again. Older. My coat different, my hair streaked with gray. I was standing in the clearing, holding the Leica in my hands. And through the lens, I was pointing it at myself. The air in the shop seemed to collapse inward, pressing against my lungs. Harold staggered back, his eyes wide with a horror I'd never seen on another man's face. "You understand what this means, don't you?" he rasped. I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry, my heart thundering in my ears. Because the truth was sinking in, cold and merciless. The final frame hadn't been taken yet. But it was coming. Harold backed into the corner of the shop, muttering, clutching the crucifix around his neck. My hands hovered over the Leica, trembling, every nerve screaming at me not to touch it and yet unable to step away. The air grew heavier. The lantern flame flickered though there was no wind. Then. Click. The camera fired on its own. The whir of film winding echoed in the silence. Slowly, I reached for the new photograph. My fingers burned the moment I touched it, like the paper itself was alive. I turned it over. It showed me and Harold in the exact moment we were standing in now. Only this time, the shadow wasn't behind me. It was behind him. Harold's breath hitched. He turned, and for the briefest second, his face twisted into something unrecognizable, wide, hollow eyes, a mouth stretched too far. Then the lantern went out. In the darkness, I heard him scream. A scream that was cut short, like breath being stolen mid-cry. I fumbled with matches, struck one and found myself alone. No Harold. Only the Leica on the floor, its lens glistening as though wet. Beside it lay a single fresh photograph. I picked it up. It was the clearing. The crooked oak. The split earth. And hundreds of people standing around it. Not hunters. Not villagers. Strangers, dressed in clothes I didn't recognize. Holding glowing rectangles in their hands, like lanterns of the future. Their faces were pale, transfixed, as though watching something they could not look away from. Then my blood froze. Because at the center of the clearing, nailed against the oak, was me. Older. Broken. Eyes wide and unblinking, mouth frozen in a scream. The photograph slipped from my fingers. My chest constricted as realization hit me, this was how the camera would show itself to the world. Not through hunters, not through whispers but through them. The people of that future date. Through their glowing rectangles, the images would spread. And no one would escape. As the final match burned down, I heard it again. Click. And in the dark, I finally understood, the Leica wasn't just taking pictures. It was finishing the story. My story. Our story. And now, it has found you.